Hi. I'm Kate McCaffrey. Welcome to the Better Reading event tonight. It's really exciting because I get the opportunity to talk to you about my new book, Double Lives, which is going to be out in all good bookshops sometime next week. I think it's the 5th of October, actually. So hopefully we're going to get some people to join into the chat and ask us questions. We've got the comments happening up the side. I think I might need to click over to that. And what we'd like is we'd like you to join in, ask any questions that you want, either about, hi Caroline, either about the novel that is about to be released or my prior work that I will discuss with you shortly. Hi, Wendy from Wagga Wagga. Oh, hey, Willow. I know that one. So I just wanted to firstly thank Better Reading and Echo, my publisher, for the opportunity to talk to you tonight about my book, Double Lives. And as I'm in Perth, so I think it would be appropriate to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, who of course are the traditional and original storytellers. Hi, Sharon. So Double Lives is my first adult book. I am a previously published YA author, and I have published 5 YA books. I've had published 5 YA books. Hello, Sharon. Nice to see you joining in. And this is my first venture into adult fiction. So it'll be, Janie Max joined us. It'll be interesting to have a conversation about the difference in the audiences, the inspirations, and writing the book. So remember, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me, please feel free to do so. Double Lives is about a journalist. Hi, Tracy. Angel is about a journalist, Amy Reinhardt, and she's a West Australian. She's just recently returned from Melbourne. She's back in a radio station and she's trying to get, the desired drive time slot. So she pitches an idea to her producer that covering crime in podcast format and live podcast format would be the way to go to get the crowds happening. So she finds this real life case about this guy, Jonah, who has murdered his girlfriend and then gone to great lengths to dispose of the body. But then when he's arrested, he just immediately confesses, pleads guilty, there's no trial, and he goes to prison. So Amy's really interested in this. She thinks that there's something really strange about the case. And so she starts to investigate his crime and what's behind it. And so the novel is actually written as a frame narrative. So the external story is about Amy, but the internal narrative is written as the actual podcast where she presents the actual live, talking transcripts on air. So as I said, it's a frame narrative. It's got the external story about Amy, and then it's got the internal story, which is the actual podcast itself. So let's have a look. We've already got quite a few questions coming up. The first question, thanks, Janie Mack. What inspired this book, Kate? Quite a few things. So given my past as a YA writer, I've always been interested in whatever is contemporary, whatever we hear in the schoolyard, whatever is, the current topic. And at that time, I was still a high school teacher. There was a lot of discussion around gender identity. And I'd seen that coming through a lot more in the later years of my teaching career. And it was really interesting to see that the younger generation was so accepting of of gender. And it was the older generation, like my generation, the teachers and the executive, that was struggling with it. And I really wanted to have a discussion. I wanted to write a book where we could look at what identity means to everybody. And so the central character, Amy, the journalist, she's a white cisgendered woman, and she explores the notion of identity through her own perspective. That was basically the inspiration for it. And Wendy Kendall, you've asked what led to changing to adult fiction for this book. It wasn't deliberate. I knew that I couldn't write in the same way I had written my other books, which were set in the schoolyard exploring controversial issues. I knew I couldn't do that because I wasn't in a position to write that way. So putting a protagonist who was in her mid to late 20s felt more appropriate, and then the content led itself that way towards an adult audience. So it wasn't deliberate. However, I have been interested in crime fiction for a really, really long time, and I have actually written some other books, crime books that aren't published yet, but maybe they will be. That would be fun. And so for me, Double Lives was actually an amalgamation of quite a few things that sort of collided at the same time, that the concept of identity and my real love for true crime podcasts. And it was really interesting because Hedley Thomas is The Teacher's Pet, and Sarah Koenig's serial This American Life. They were two podcasts that really inspired me to write in this way. And of course, in the last month or so, both of those podcasts have had spectacular results, with Chris Dawson being convicted for the murder of Lynn Dawson in The Teacher's Pet, and Adnan Syed just being released from prison for the murder of Heyman Lee, his girlfriend, and he served 20 years in prison for that. So for me, there was a lot of things that came together in constructing Double Lives. Sharon Hill, you asked, did you have to do much research for this book? I think it would be true to say that I have to do a lot of research for every book, and I think most writers would probably agree with that. Particularly when you're exploring really sensitive or controversial topics, it's really important to find out as much as you can so that you can deliver the most credible, realistic rendition, truthful and careful and sensitive that you can. So for me, research is really important. In fact, I often go to schools and I do book talks for my YA books. And one of my YA books is this one here, In Ecstasy. And In Ecstasy is about two girls that take the drug ecstasy and what happens when they go down different lines taking this drug. And I often go to a school and I'll talk about it, and I'll talk that, as a writer, you need to write about what you know. And then some guy in the back, will put his hand up and he'll go, "Hey, Kate." And I'll go, "Oh, hi, Jono." And he'll go, "So you say that you have to write what you know. How do you know what ecstasy's like?" And I'll be like, "Well, Jono, really the question you're asking me is, did I take ecstasy in order to write this book?" And Jono will go, "Yeah." And I'll go, "No." And he'll go, "She's lying." But the truth is, I researched so much that you could actually write, a dissertation on something, but you're only doing it to have credible lines and truth in storytelling, which I think is really quite important. Okay, just asking Willow, what challenges did you face while writing this book? Many. There are many challenges, I think, that all writers face when they're writing a book, and that's what I was saying, the research aspects. With Double Lives, I really wanted to be sensitive, and my publisher did get a sensitivity reader because there is a transgender element to it. So we actually made sure that we were listening, that we were talking to the communities, and we were doing all of that kind of stuff. Can I? I'm just going to acknowledge the fish in the room at this point. So this is my office. My fish aren't normally there; they're normally around the corner. But I thought they'd make a nice backdrop because I don't have a big bookcase behind me full of books. My bookcase is actually over there, and it's really, really messy and quite disgusting. So I moved the fish, and I hope you can see my fish. They're new. The black one, his name is Othello. And the white one, she has 2 love hearts on her head, and her name is Desdemona. I'm hoping that they don't end up the same way as that Shakespearean tragedy, because fish are absolute fun. They're so much fun. So, yeah, they're in the background there with some of my YA books, which I'll talk about if we get an opportunity. Wendy says, do you think you will continue in this genre now? I love crime, and not actually committing crime, writing about crime and listening to crime. But I would really probably like to, have another couple of cracks at it and maybe finish off a couple that I've started already. And, there's always a possibility. I don't know, but this is season 1 of Stranger Crime. So who knows, maybe if it's good, maybe there will be a season 2 of Stranger Crime with a completely different crime. And Jill, I think you're completely correct that messy bookshelves reflect teachers, as do messy desks. And I think that we can all agree that when we tidy things up, we can never actually find anything ever again. So just if you're joining us now, I'm Kate McCaffrey, and this is my new book, Double Lives. And I just thought I'd read you the very opening of the frame narrative and then the internal narrative, but I'll jump, I won't read the whole thing. So chapter 1 begins the idea. The truth is in the detail, within the nuance of the story, the cadence of the voice, the tilt of the head, the flutter of an eyelash. People are anthologies of stories, mosaics made up of minor events, small truths that constitute who we are, what we believe in, the way we live. Why do I shake my head every time I'm offered a flute of champagne? Because I'll laughingly tell my friends I haven't touched champagne since the night I graduated from my bachelor's degree, and I drank so much I vomited out the back of my boyfriend's 1974 Ford Falcon. Of course, I believed I'd opened the door, but then I sheepishly acknowledged that I hadn't. And that admission, that self-awareness, that embarrassing truth gives the story its required believability. Before all this began, I like to think that I was a crusader for truth. It was a chalice brimming with an indisputable goodness, the finding and revelation of which would act as some form of emancipation from the other greatest defining feature of people, their secret. Journalists are often regarded as creatures of prey, great winged birds with curved beaks who pick apart and rip through the meaty flesh of other people's lives. As a breed, we are viewed as toxic to privacy and secrecy. With our counterpart parasites, the photographers, we splash the front pages of magazines and newspapers with dark secrets that are often trussed up with pithy puns. A picture of Donald Trump's hair blowing in the wind, captioned, "There's going to be hell to pay," or President Bill Clinton's acquittal at his impeachment trial, close but no cigar. These front pages give us what we creatures crave: money, success, greater opportunities. We march on, leaving a trail of carcasses in our wake. And so that's the external story, and that's Amy. That's Amy's voice, and she discusses how she finds this podcast about Jonah and about the murder, and how she sets about investigating it, and it then becomes this combination of her podcast, bringing in the listeners to contribute to her podcast and to this crime, this mystery about this crime, and what that means, like in our sort of society right now. So then the opening of the podcast begins. Every other chapter is the podcast, and it begins, "Hi, I'm Amy Reinhart, and I'm the presenter of Strange Crime, a live broadcast and podcast on Radio Western every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Season 1 is called Double Lives and examines the Jonah Scott murder of Casey Williams. Let me take you back to a summer night in mid-January. A girl's body is found floating in an isolated river in the state's remote southwest. The Jane Doe, a victim of a savage stabbing attack, is unidentifiable. A manhunt begins, which leads detectives into a world of teenage sexuality, drug rings, and religious cults, resulting in the conviction of then 19-year-old Jonah Scott. The victim, his girlfriend, Casey Williams. The outcome, Jonah's immediate confession and compliance with investigators. His plea, guilty. The sentence, life imprisonment. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Boy kills girl, admits it, goes to prison. Probably the kind of case most detectives dream of. But what if, I don't know, something just doesn't add up, something feels decidedly odd? Why go to such lengths, which we'll look at later, to cover up a crime only to be totally compliant when the police show up? Why murder at all? I invite you all to tune in every Wednesday as I delve into the many parts of this case that don't add up. Oh, and listeners, we're doing this in real time. Each week, we're producing one episode. This series isn't a pre-recording. We're going to see where this starts out and where we end up. So I ask you to join me for the ride. Just a word of warning. Listeners are advised that this podcast contains graphic and disturbing material. Double lives. So that's sort of where we're at with the book. I'm just having a look at... Okay, I've got a few other questions before I go on. Jane says, does the research ever change the plot idea? That's a really good question, actually. I'm not sure. I think it does. I think when you look at the way people write, and everybody writes differently. I know that you've got plotters, so they're pioneers. They won't move on until that chapter or that paragraph is perfect. And then you've got the other type who just, fly by the seat of their pants. And that's kind of me. So I kind of make things up as I go along. And I think that everything is probably subject to change depending on what the research shows and what the characters actually expose about themselves. Because sometimes you think that a character is going to be doing something and then they take you in a different direction. Sometimes it's really quite organic as opposed to anything else. Izzy says, given that this book is based mainly in WA, did you visit any places to help you with crafting the setting in Double Lives? A lot of it is set locally in Perth, so a place I'm particularly familiar with. Also down south, and that's a holiday destination for most of us here in Perth, so I'm very familiar with the places. So going there just for a quick holiday seemed like a good idea at the time as well. So a lot of people are interested in what makes you want to be a writer, and I think for me it was that's just what I wanted to be. I always wanted to be a writer, and as a small kid, when I was in school and the task was to write a short story, that was the best gift, was to be told that you had to write a short story. So I was always the one who wrote the short story that and did a cover page and an imprint page, and tried to really create a novel. And I think back then, like my mum was very, very supportive of my writing, and she always said that she thought I'd make a great writer, but that I needed something to fall back on. And that basically meant you need to go to uni and you need to get a degree. And so I did probably what most writers do who don't know what they want to be. Apart from a writer, I did a Bachelor of Arts with a double major in English and Fine Art and a minor in history. And I learned very quickly that, a Bachelor of Arts back in the day, wasn't enough to really get you a job. So I ended up doing a dip ed. My mum was very much, you'd be a great teacher, you should do teaching. And I was, really reluctant. That was probably one of the last jobs I actually really wanted to do. But I did the qualification thinking, I'll go and travel the world, and ended up finding out that I really like teaching. And so teaching, I always like to think of teaching as like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And that's kind of what happened. And so I stayed in teaching for nearly 23 years, I think, having children during that time, and always wanting to write. And it was actually the first time I left teaching to have my first child that I wrote my first book, my first manuscript, because, getting published is particularly hard in Australia. So I know that a lot of people who really want information on getting published, the thing about it is you just don't give up. I think that's the difference between a published writer and an unpublished writer. Is the published writer just kept going, kept finding out how to improve, kept submitting, kept getting rejected. And so that's basically what I did. Went back to teaching and left for the second time. And during the second time, the second pregnancy, I wrote Destroying Avalon. Destroying Avalon was my first novel, and it was published by Fremantle Press in 2006, and it was the first book ever written about cyberbullying. So it became quite a significant book in my career, and it was really what launched it. I'm just going to go back and look at what people are saying, because I've left you all out. Jane Mack says this should be an audiobook and you should narrate it. Thanks, Jane. We've got a contract in the mix at the moment for it to be an audiobook, and the company that want to turn it into an audiobook are really keen about using other voices for the podcast. So that could be really quite interesting. That's some fields of BA's got job in foreign affairs. Yes, Jel, I agree that some did. And I really, when I first did my BA, I did it to actually either be a foreign diplomat, except I'm not very diplomatic. And the other thing I wanted to do was law. But I kind of am glad that, I took the way I did, because I don't know if it would have afforded me the experience and the exposure to the things that I wrote about to be a writer, though I know that people write from all different walks of life. Okay, Jill, you also are saying 4 terms being floated around for methods of writing: plotters, plantsers who do some plotting and then mostly pantser their books. Next, plotster is a term for those who mainly plot and do a little pantsing. Well, that's very good. That's very clever. I'm not sure which one I am out of that. Maybe the last one. So resilience is the key. Yes, Janie Mack says resilience is the key. That's basically any time I talk to students and talk to people who would like to be a writer, that's the whole key to it. You just got to keep going. You've got to have belief in yourself. I believe that encouraging people to enter competitions, to send work in for even, short fiction, just to get that sort of exposure, that's definitely the way to fine tune your craft and also get more exposure in the field. So going back to Double Lives, which is the book that we're talking about mostly tonight, when I wanted to write this story, I came across a true life crime. And I think for most, in fact, I think for all of my books, I'm always inspired by real life. And that's really where the ideas tend to come from. And there was this crime in America, and it was this murder, and it was about, that he'd gone to these great lengths, and then he just confessed and admitted his guilt. And it was kind of like, given all the precedents and given all the things that you can do, there was something really weird about why you would do that. And it turned out he was a member of some gang, and he feared reprisal, which is why he was prepared to take life in prison. And I thought that was a really interesting idea. And taking an idea like that and putting it into an Australian setting, I had to sort of consider, what would you be fearful of? And that's where Jonah, the character in this book, he actually comes from this religious cult, and it's the teachings of the cult that he fears. Thank you. That he fears. So that's why there is this involvement, and we delve into the idea of cults and what that looks like in society today, because I think there's something really, really interesting about cults and when people get involved in cults and how hard they are to get out of. Jane Tara says, what does your workday look like when writing? In 2018, I resigned from teaching to pursue my writing career full time, because it's really hard. It's hard to do both. It's particularly hard to be a 5-classroom English teacher and try and be an author at the same time. And you have to turn down a lot of opportunities because of the school term and that sort of thing. So when I left, this became my full-time job basically. And we get up, go to the gym, come home, and then we work. And we work from really about 9 o'clock till 4 o'clock every day. And that will be writing or researching mostly. I find that I'm also doing a PhD at the moment in creative writing, and that PhD is a novel, a manuscript, and a critical exegesis, and it is a YA novel. So I haven't abandoned the YA genre because I think it's such an important genre, and you get to do a lot within that. So my YA novel is about toxic masculinity in the AFL. And I finished the first draft of that, and I'll be meeting with my supervisors actually tomorrow to discuss, obviously the work that needs to be done on it and that sort of thing. But I'm interested. I think I'm interested in writing across lots of genres. It's always the ideas that you get from the world around you, and I have a folder that I always email myself a news report, or I hold things in folders that one day I think when I need an idea, I'm going to go back and look at them. But the ideas are always coming, so it's always, there's always something I think to write about. And the other thing I think is interesting when we go back to Double Lives is the podcasts. The podcast idea that podcasts are now intersecting with the judicial system. And that's what we saw in those last 2 podcasts that I mentioned, The Teacher's Pet and Serial. So even with The Teacher's Pet, Hedley Thomas, the creator, he's actually a witness in the case, because they're looking at how are these podcasts actually interfering with witnesses? Are they shaping the justice system? And I think there's now this acceptance that that podcasts are a real big part of the judicial system and crime. Janie Mack asks, would you ever do anything historical? Yeah, I think I would. And I've got an idea for a really interesting historical book, which is actually about my husband's grandfather, who was a fighter pilot in World War I, and he left England for Borneo in World War II, when World War II started, because he didn't want to be involved in the war. And he was actually the first flying doctor of Borneo. But of course, the Japanese came to Borneo, and he ended up being a prisoner of war because he was seen as a spy and, giving medicine to the prisoners of war. And he was killed just before the end of the war. But that is actually part of a much bigger story, and I think a really interesting story for, that time in history. Jill, you're going to have to check out my YA books. Great. Check out my YA books. And I'll just quickly show them to you now. Destroying Avalon, that was the book I wrote about cyberbullying. It was published in 2006, and it's still being used in schools now. So it had much longer legs than we thought. In Ecstasy was my second book, which was about the 2 girls who try the drug ecstasy. Beautiful Monster. Janie Mack has just said, read Beautiful Monster. We don't have time because we've got like a minute left. But Beautiful Monster is about a girl whose brother gets killed in a hit and run, and she ends up developing an eating disorder. Crashing Down was actually the first manuscript I ever wrote, but with a major overhaul and 3 books behind it and a lot more experience in writing. And that's about teen pregnancy and when things go wrong, basically, when things crash down. And Saving Jazz was my last YA, 2016. And that's actually about when mistakes go viral on the internet, when pictures get posted and things go viral. So that brings us to the end of tonight's chat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Obviously, I would like to thank, again, Better Reading. I'd like to thank Echo Publishing, my agent, Fiona. Also, thank you all for coming along tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. I've got Double Lives being officially released next week, October the 5th, and I'm going to be over in Sydney, like for one day, the 14th of October, doing some book signings in some bookshops over there. So we will be posting that on socials, and check out katemccaffrey.org. And I'll put up dates and stuff. And if you're in Sydney, I'd love you to come along to one of the bookshops and we can say hi. So that's us done, I think. Thank you very much. It was so nice to be here tonight. Have